about, feel free to say so, and I'll make comments on those plants if I can. But I have a little slideshow prepared for you guys and some plants picked out that I wanted to talk with you about today. There's always so many plants that we could talk about, so it's hard to narrow it down, but I just picked a few just to give you a taste of what is in the book, The Ecology of Herbal Medicine, and what's in the Materia Medica. And so it'll just be a little taste of that. But I'm going to go ahead and start sharing my screen. And for anyone who just arrived, I love when people have questions or things that are relevant to share. So please feel free to ask questions, and so we can have a little discussion. That would be really fun. So please feel free to do that. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with you guys. So here we go, and I'll keep the chat open so I can see what you guys put in there. All right. So my book is called The Ecology of Herbal Medicine, A Guide to Plants and Living Landscapes of the American Southwest. The beginning part of the book has some introductory chapters that help you to become acquainted with ecosystems and landscapes in the Southwest. There's a lot of stories about New Mexico in there. So for those of you who are from New Mexico, I think you're going to feel very at home reading this book, and you're going to love where you live even more than you already do. And in those introductory chapters, I do also talk about my relationship with the land and with plants, and give some ideas about how other people can make those kinds of connections and how they can really change one's life. And so I've shared a little bit of general information and also some personal stories in those chapters. But tonight, I really want to talk with you all about the Materia Medica, which is the second part of the book, the largest part of the book. And in there, I give in-depth plant profiles for about 39 species of plants. And that collection of plants includes trees and herbs and native and non-native species, and including some invasive tree species, which I encourage people to use as herbal medicines. And I chose plants that I thought were very important ecologically and culturally to the Southwest. So all of these plants have incredible stories to tell. And so I'm just gonna give you a little bit of a taste of that here tonight. Again, feel free to put questions in the chat, and I'll be happy to incorporate those. So let's start right off with yarrow. Yarrow is a plant that a lot of people know. If you know anything about herbal medicines, then you've probably heard of yarrow. You might already have used yarrow. I just see from what little bit has appeared in the chat already that some people here already have experience using herbal medicine. So that's great. Yarrow, interestingly, is a species of plant that is native across the northern continents of the globe. And that unique or unusual status means that people around the world across time and space know this plant and have a lot of stories to tell about it, including a lot of medicinal uses for this plant. So there's a rich, rich history about yarrow, and so much we could say about it. And so that's one of the reasons why I picked it as a plant to discuss here tonight. And I'm showing you a picture of its gorgeous little flowers. It's the white species that is most commonly used in herbal medicine. And yarrow is a plant that has a lot of research about it, as well as a lot of stories that humans have recorded over time. And those stories go back really far. Yarrow is an interesting plant ecologically. I want to start with the plant itself and a little bit about how it lives its life, because one of the things I always tell my herbal students is plants are the medicine. Herbal medicine is not some dried stuff in a jar. Herbal medicine is living plants. And so I like to talk about them in that way. So yarrow is a plant, as I said, which finds its home naturally and natively across the northern continents of the globe. And in the United States, it's a fairly common plant that sometimes can be an indicator of overgrazed grasslands. Also, we have found through scientific research that the environment in which yarrow grows can significantly affect its production of medicinal plant chemicals, which plants produce for themselves so that they can survive and thrive more effectively in their localized environments. So depending on what altitude or other different kinds of environmental factors these plants are experiencing, more sun or more shade, more disturbance or less disturbance, all of these kinds of things can change the way plants produce their own chemicals for their own survival and well-being. And then they can also then therefore affect the medicinal qualities for humans. So there are some studies on yarrow that help us to understand that, and similar studies on other species of plants as well. But it's a reminder about the importance of environment for plants and for us, because our environment affects the way plants grow and live their lives. And our environment, of course, affects our ability to thrive as well. So it makes perfect sense. So yarrow has this fascinating relationship with humans, as I said, going back really, really far in human history. Based on what we know, it might be fair to say that yarrow is one of the oldest known herbal remedies, because yarrow was found at Neanderthal graves going back a very long time in the history of humanity. And it's been found in ceremonial context of burials, and also been found in the teeth of Neanderthals. So we can infer from that the likelihood that they were using yarrow both ceremonially, in perhaps burial rituals, and also medicinally. If you've ever chewed on yarrow, you know that it is bitter. And so it's unlikely that a person would have been chewing on that for fun or for flavor. And it's much more likely that they would have been chewing on it as a way of absorbing its medicine. And so a very fascinating early history of this plant, which continues. And yarrow, as I said, has been associated with many cultures around the globe. And so that story continues out of Asia, from where we just were talking about Neanderthal graves, and into the ancient world of Europe. Yarrow, there are stories of yarrow being used to heal wounded warriors at the siege of Troy. We also have found yarrow in an ancient sunken Roman ship from the 1st century AD, along with other medicinal plants. So it was found in a context, in bottles, alongside other medicinal plants. So we can infer from that also the acknowledgement of medicinal use, and perhaps shipping and trading it as a valued good. And so yarrow is just fascinating with this rich legacy of relationship to humans. And then, of course, the medicinal history of this is so lengthy. There's so much we could say about yarrow. The leaves and flowers are collected for preparing herbal remedies. Yarrow could be made into a tea. It can be made into a tincture, which is an extract and a combination of alcohol and water. It can be made into topical products, into oils and washes and soaks, and also just applied topically as a plant poultice, which means taking the fresh plant material, bruising it up a little bit, and applying it topically. And that is perhaps one of its greatest uses, because yarrow became really famous as an herbal medicine because of its ability to very quickly stop bleeding wounds from bleeding. And so it's the type of plant which can have a very rapid and dramatic effect in that context. And so literally just bruising some of the leaves and flowers and applying them to a bleeding wound will stop it from bleeding pretty quickly. It's a great thing to know when you're camping with your sons and they pull out their knives to start carving some wood that they find. The first thing I'm going to do is to go look and see where some yarrow is growing nearby. It's a nice thing to have growing in your backyard for the same reason, because of course those kinds of things happen in the kitchen or in daily life all the time. So yarrow as a wound care herb became quite well known for that use. And not only does it stop bleeding wounds, but it also disinfects them. So it's an all around great herb for first aid treatments. It also helps to reduce inflammation and pain associated with those wounds. But yarrow isn't legendary just because of that. It takes a lot more to rise to the top of the herbal world. And so yarrow also has a lot of uses in the digestive system. As I said, it's somewhat bitter, so it's really excellent at helping to improve digestive efficiency, reduce the symptoms of indigestion. It's also excellent for the respiratory system. It's an herb that can help cut mucus. If you have a wet, mucusy kind of cold, it's helpful for that. Additionally, it's very good at regulating the cardiovascular system. It can actually regulate your capillary action and help to increase the release of heat from the body or to conserve heat in the body. And it does this through capillary action. It also does it through diaphoretic action, which means opening up the pores to release heat or closing them to conserve heat. And so this makes it a very good remedy for treating fevers. So yarrow is a very, very useful herb. There's a long list of other additional uses for this plant. But when I teach my usual herbal studies semester with the students, we go through body systems week after week, and we talk about yarrow almost every single week because it's useful in so many body systems. So if any of you are gardeners, I would encourage you to plant this and grow this, and just having this available because it's so useful in so many ways. And it's a really beautiful herb, and it's very easy to grow in our climate. It likes disturbed soils of a garden environment. It likes sun, and it's reasonably drought tolerant. So it's not going to take a lot of water. And Sarah asks in the chat, you said it's for a cough. Just drink a tonic of it. So it's good for a mucusy kind of cough. So you could also have a dry cough. And I'll tell you about some other herbs here tonight, which might be good for that type of cough. But yarrow can be useful for cough where there is mucus. And I would recommend probably making a tincture for that and just using it for a short period of time that the person has that cough, and giving it that way. It's also something you could put into a tea blend. If you're making a tea for someone who's sick, you can put some yarrow in there. It's a little bit bitter tasting, so if you want someone to drink the tea and enjoy the tea, I would recommend mixing it with another herb that has a really good flavor that the person likes, something like chamomile or mint, for example. Most people really like those herbs, or lemon balm. All really easy to grow garden herbs. And yes, using it dried. I dry most of my herbs, not all, but many of them. And so I would definitely use dried yarrow for tincturing or for tea making. And Emily asks in the chat, would you please pronounce the Latin names when you introduce the herbs? Absolutely. This one's Achillea millefolium. And yes, Lauren asks, do you apply it directly to wounds? Absolutely. You can take the fresh leaves and flowers and you can bruise them just a little bit. You want to crush them in your hand a little so that they can sort of release the juices inside, and then apply that topically. Of course, you want to be careful not to get crushed up plant parts inside of a wound. You don't want to have to rinse those out later. That's why you don't want to tear it up. you just want to bruise it a little bit. And you can apply that directly. It's a very simple and ancient wound care art form that herbalists are very good at doing. And that includes you guys. So here's another picture of yarrow just to help you become acquainted with it. Again, this is Achillea millefolium, and this is what the whole plant looks like growing in a wild location, so you can keep an eye out for that. I'm going to move right along here to globe mallow. I absolutely love this plant. This is one of the first plants that really grabbed my attention decades ago when I first started really noticing plants in my world and wanting to know more about them. This plant just fascinated me. It has these tiny orange flowers. This is a very common native wildflower in the Southwest, so I presume many of you have seen it, even if you didn't know what it was. Now you do. This is globe mallow. The genus name is called Spheralcia, and I have just SP here next to it because there are numerous species that can be found and that can be used medicinally. So I'm not identifying a particular species in this case. So plants of the Spherolcia genus we call globe mallows. Globe mallows are they commonly cross hybridize, and so sometimes it could be really difficult to even know for sure which species you're looking at. So here's just a close-up of this gorgeous flower shining in the sun. And I think you can see why I fell so hard in love with this plant. And this is a plant that really likes the habitat of the Southwest. It likes hot conditions and dry soils. And so this is a plant that I feel is really going to be an important ally for us as we move into the future decades, which we are expecting to be hotter and drier. And this is a plant that is adapted to hot and dry conditions. And I think that this is a plant I really want people to know because it is an ally that will be with us as climate change unfolds. And it's one of the most useful herbs in our apothecary as well. I collect leaves and flowers on this plant, and as I said, it is a plant that is most commonly associated with southwestern habitats, though there is one species, which I'll show you in a moment, which does have a wider range and grows across the western states and plain states. And it's more common in the East Mountain area. So let's take a look at that, and I'll tell you a little bit about its medicinal properties. So just checking here in the chat, Anna asks, does it matter if the yarrow has lavender flowers? So just going back to yarrow for a moment, that is a plant which has many cultivars that are sold at nurseries and in different colors for decorative purposes. I cannot speak to all of those cultivars. I have not worked with those medicinally. The white flowering species is what herbalists seek and what they use, and that is considered to be the medicinal species. It's possible that other cultivars may also have medicinal activity. I just don't know. We don't have a lot of research on that, and I don't have that personal experience. So I usually recommend that people look for the white yarrow. It's fairly common in wild landscapes and also easy to grow. And it would look great with your lavender colored yarrow as well. And then so I think we're caught up on the chat questions. So back to Spheralcia or globe mallow. The one on the left here with the blue background, this one is showing you that some species have a very tall, leggy structure. They're upright and erect. The one on the right, where you see all the greenery, that one is the Spherolcia Coxania species. And that one is the one which I previously mentioned that's wider ranging across the western states and plain states. And I find that common in the East Mountain area here of Albuquerque. And you can use any of these species interchangeably. And again, you'd be collecting leaves and flowers. And this species on the right, the Spherolcia Coxania species, is a shorter, more compact species that doesn't grow nearly as tall as the others. So it does look a little different, but they're both globe mallows. Now, why am I so crazy about this plant? Well, aside from it being insanely beautiful, it's also, as I said, a very valued medicinal plant in my apothecary. It is profoundly valuable to the immune system. And because it is a balancing herb, it is an herb that shows its intelligence as an herbal medicine. It can do opposing things based on the circumstances it meets in your body. And when I first started learning about herbs, I thought that seems impossible, but it's true. And many herbs do that. But globe mallow is excellent at doing that for the immune system. So if a person takes globe mallow who has an autoimmune condition, for example, they have an overactive immune response. Globe mallow can help calm that immune response down and make it less excitable, less responsive. Meanwhile, another person who has a real sluggish immune response and tends to get sick a lot, maybe they keep getting the same illness over and over, or when they get sick, they have kind of a hard time bouncing back and making a full recovery. That person taking globe mallow is going to experience a greater coordination of their immune functioning. The immune system has many parts, and globe mallow can help coordinate the workings of all of those parts to create a more effective immune response. And so that's what we call a tonic herb that balances a body system and makes it function more effectively. And that's how an herb can do opposite things, because it's seeking a balanced response. And so it might amp up one thing or tone down another thing depending on who's taking the herb. So a very fascinating herb for the immune system. And in this era where we have autoimmune conditions on the rise, lots of people are experiencing chronic inflammation nowadays in some area of the body. Globe mallow, in my view, is one of the herbs of our time because of this. And as the earth becomes more inflamed, globe mallow seems to thrive in these environmental conditions and is there for us as our bodies become more inflamed. So this is a reminder about our deep interconnectivity with the landscape and with ecosystems. What we do there, if we pull things out of balance, we're also doing that to ourselves, because all life is interconnected. And globe mallow is a great reminder of that. And so I have a great appreciation for this plant. Additionally, globe mallow has another really cool thing that I want to share with you, which is that it contains a substance called mucilage, which is a slippery, slimy kind of substance. If any of you have ever taken slippery elm throat lozenges, then you know what I'm talking about. And so this mucilage is great when you have a dry cough that's just dry and irritating. If you have a sore throat or swollen tonsils or something like that, this slimy, slippery substance is really useful for coating and soothing and reducing that inflammation. And globe mallow is also really good at soothing irritated soft tissue. So that would also include topical, your skin. If you have hot, dry, irritated skin condition, globe mallow can be very soothing to that, similar to how oatmeal bath might work. And so you could use it internally, you could use it topically for those kinds of conditions. And you can gather roots too, although I don't encourage a lot of that unless there's a huge stand of it, because we really want to be respectful and honorable when we're harvesting wild plants. And if we don't need to take the roots, it's better not to, because we want to let plants continue to grow and thrive, and we don't want to take too much. So I always just take a very small piece from a living plant and then move on to another one, because I want that plant to continue to survive. So if I can avoid harvesting the roots, I do. But I do have a lot of this in my own garden, and it spreads around. So in that case, I do pull up the roots, and I do use those medicinally as well. Good thing to have on hand in the COVID era. If you do end up having a dry cough, I wouldn't want to be without this plant. You can take the dried plant material, and you can grind it up and make a cold infusion out of it. So it's basically like making tea the way you know how to make tea, but instead of using boiling water, you would want to use cold water, and you would want to let that soak in your refrigerator for a couple of hours, and do it pretty densely. And then you'll come back and you'll have something that looks kind of like a gelatinous substance, almost jello-like, and you can take spoonfuls of that and mix it into water or juice or whatever it is that the person will drink. And then the drink becomes very cooling and moistening and soothing to the hot, dry, irritated tissue. So globe mallow, a wonderful plant. I hope you guys get to know this plant and love it as much as I do. It's so common in our area. If you have any questions about globe mallow, feel free to put them in the chat, because I'm going to move on to the next plant, which is Vervain, or also called Verbena. And again, I haven't designated a specific species in this case, because there are numerous species that could be used medicinally. This is another plant that you can find around many continents and countries around the world. It's not always the same species. We have different species living in different places, but in the old world herbal traditions of Europe, Verbena Aficionalis was a legendary herb, and still is among practicing herbalists. This is an herb that has fantastic stories associated with it, and is a beautiful plant. So I love this plant a lot. In the old world, Verbena was really legendary, especially in the Middle Ages, and even before that. Verbena has legendary status in Greek, Roman, Druid, medieval European cultures. This plant was said to have decorated Zeus's table and was worn in the crown of Aphrodite. This plant was even said to have been present at Christ's crucifixion and used to help heal the wounds of that event. So this is an herb of truly legendary status. The Romans loved it so much, they had an altar decorating festival called Verbena. And so this herb was just loved and used for many, many magical purposes and healing purposes. When medieval European elites would throw parties, they would sprinkle verbena infused water around the castle grounds to enliven their guests and make them feel more happy. People strung up verbena along with yarrow, which we just talked about, and another famous herb, St. John's wort. These things were strung up along doorways to protect against witchcraft and evil spirits. They were brought into the everyday lives of people as protectors of health and as sacred allies in everyday life. The things that people feared most in medieval Europe, this was a plant that they believed protected them in the face of ghosts and witchcraft and supernatural activity. And so if you can put yourself in the shoes of those people, of course, we still have fears and anxieties today. And so it's easy for us to imagine this fear of the unknown, especially having, we're living through a pandemic. Last year, we lived through a lot of unknown. We weren't stringing verbena up in our doorways, but that could have been a good ritual for us to help us engage in mindful activity and protect us against our own runaway thoughts. Verbena was used like that as a sacred herb of protection. So I'm going to take a quick look at the chat here to see what's coming up. Pamela asks, does the root of the plant often have slightly different healing qualities than the above ground parts? That's a great question. And that really depends on the plant. In the case of verbena, I wouldn't use the roots. They tend to make people nauseous. So I use the leaves and flowers of this plant. In some cases, the roots are used along with the leaves and flowers, or could be used instead of the leaves and flowers. So it really depends on the plant. But sometimes different plant parts can contain different chemicals that can cause negative symptoms in a person, like nausea would be the most common, or diarrhea. Those are the two most common symptoms of taking an herb too much or taking a part of an herb that isn't suited for you. So it depends on the plant species. In this case, I would not use the roots. And then let's see, is there a difference between blue vervain and plain vervain? I think of this, Emily, as blue vervain. So blue vervain and vervain, to me, are the same plant in my mind. But this is where common names can sometimes confuse people. And this is why I do like to introduce botanical names to people so that we can make sure we're talking about the same thing. So in this case, I think that would be the same thing. And then Willa asks, whenever it's good timing, just wondering if you have any specific recommendations on how herbs are dried and best to preserve all the good stuff. Well, I'll just say quickly, I'm a plain and simple kind of person. I don't keep fancy equipment. I'm old school and I just like to use what I have. I dry my herbs in brown paper shopping bags. I have a laundry room big enough where I can string up a laundry line and clip my brown paper bags to a laundry line so I can keep them up off the floor because I have dogs. I don't want dog hair to get in there. Or dust and dirt, you know. And so that's a nice way to dry herbs because it keeps light away, but allows airflow for the herbs to dry properly. And then once they're dried completely, I store them in glass jars in a dark closet. You want to keep them away from air and light to preserve their quality. So that's basically how I do that. And then Susan asks, is vervain used for depression and mental illness? Absolutely. Those old stories of people hanging vervain up in their doorways to protect against witchcraft and ghosts, we might blow those off as just dumb stories from the past, but in reality, they're very illuminating because in those times, we didn't have a paradigm to talk about mental health. We didn't have the language to talk about mental health. So those stories tell us about how people did use herbs for mental health. And so, yes, verbena is a great herb for people who are nervous, anxious, and stressed out, and exhausted. And oftentimes that can manifest as controlling behavior. When you feel like your life is out of control, you try to control little things around your house or little things in your personal relationships. And so if you find yourself doing that, then vervain is a great remedy for people whose nervousness and anxiety especially manifests like that. But in general, it's a great herb for lifting the spirit and helping to balance a person's emotional state and to feel a little bit more in control of that and to feel a little bit better about that. So yes, and vervain is also used as a digestive bitter to help improve digestion. It's also an herb that is very useful in the urinary system. It can help break down urinary stones and gravel. It has diuretic qualities, so it moves that system, the urinary system. Also, I really like this plant for warding off illness. This is a plant that you can take at that very first hint of malaise. When you first have that feeling of, I wonder if I'm coming down with something, or I wonder if I wake up in the morning, am I going to be sick? When you have that feeling, that's when you want to start taking this. This, especially combined with echinacea, will help to ward off that illness and prevent it from gaining momentum and settling in. When I do that early enough, most of the time, I never feel like that illness ever gains traction. And I might feel a little tired or something, but I don't really ever feel sick. So that I have tested again and again and again. And it's a very reliable use of this plant, especially when combined with echinacea. And then I will just say with herbal medicines in this particular use, especially, taking them frequently is very important for efficacy. We're used to like the 12 or 24-hour pill. It's not like that with herbs. That's a common way to become disappointed with herbal medicines, is to not use them properly. And so having proper training on using herbs with their dosage and formulation is really helpful for success. So if there's anything else about this plant, feel free to put it in there. I'm going to show you this last species here, which this is Verbena Mcdouglier. This is what I think is the most common species in our area here in Albuquerque and Santa Fe areas. This is a plant that likes to grow in open, dryish, middle elevation mountain meadows. You can see its habitat here on the left and a close up on the right. It's the same plant, the same species, the Verbena Mcdouglier, named after a botanist. And so beautiful plant. You can cultivate this and grow it you can also with glove mallow and yarrow. And its leaves and flowers that I collect and use. I mostly tincture this plant because it's a little bitter tasting. Most people don't particularly really enjoy drinking the tea. Though if you like bitter greens and bitter herbs, maybe you would drink it. But I've worked mostly with women and children, so I'm big on compliance and making things taste as good as possible. So that's a little bit about Vervain. Let's move along to Russian olive. This is an invasive non-native tree that people commonly hate. And rightfully so, because it does displace cottonwoods along our riparian corridors and is a invasive species that is rapidly altering the ecology of those environments. So as a person who has worked in restoration and conservation, I can certainly understand the disdain for this plant. As an herbalist, I'm ready to embrace it, because working with abundant plants, especially invasive non-native species, allows us to get herbal medicine while also protecting native plants whose populations might be less stable or in decline, who may be more susceptible to changing environmental conditions or overharvest. So I like encouraging the use of weeds and invasive species as herbal medicines. Also, it's important to remember that many, if not most, non-native invasive species actually were and are important medicines in their original range. So just because we don't like them doesn't mean they're not medicinal or edible or nutritious. So this plant actually has a very high status of herbal use in its home range. In Asia. And I would say this is a plant that people should start getting to know, working through your emotional conflicting feelings about it if you're an herbalist, and think about how we could use this. So there's a lot of ethnobotanical information about this plant's medicinal qualities recorded by people in its original range. And this plant has some very important medicinal uses. The berries that it produces, and here you can see some immature berries here. These are earlier in the season when the leaves look really nice. But you want to collect the berries at the end of summer or early fall. If you wait too long, the birds will get them. So you don't want to wait too long, but they would be lighter in color. And if you bite on them, they have a big seed inside, but if you bite on them later in the season, they've produced more sugars and they're like a little bit sweeter. So you want to get them at that time of year. You can also collect leaves during the summertime when they look nice like this. And you can also use bark as well. So all of those parts are medicinal. The berries in particular are very high in antioxidants. And I like to use leaves and berries and a little bit of bark. And many herbalists will also, if a plant has thorns like this one does, will also grab a few of those thorns, prune those off, and throw those in too as a symbol of protection. So this plant has one very interesting use that I can't say I know any other plant to do, which is to regulate blood pressure. So again, a balancing intuitive herb that can help to raise up blood pressure or help lower it down as the case it needs. And particularly useful for people who have that health condition of oscillating blood pressure. It can help stabilize that. And so very important medicinal use. Also, there's a lot of research on this plant validating ethnobotanical use for pain relief. This plant has profound anti-inflammatory and pain relieving activity, which has been shown in research studies to be very effective, if not more effective than some prescribed medications for that purpose. So a very important healing herb that I would recommend that people take some time to get to know. I think we sometimes, if we know about ecological issues and invasive plants, we can just really, really have a lot of disdain for them. But I would encourage people to set that aside and start working with these plants as food and medicine. In the Bosque here in Albuquerque, where I work, this plant, can form monoscapes and can really reduce biodiversity. Of course, we have invited it into the landscape through altering water flow patterns and damming the river, and all the water diversions has created such change in our riparian corridors that native plants struggle to survive. And plants like this one and salt cedar are very at home in that environment, and they can establish themselves and they can spread. And so they come in essentially on our invitation, because we have used water in such as an economic resource and not allowed enough to remain in the system for normal ecosystem functioning. So the more alteration we create, the more these plants proliferate and displace native plants. And then once they become established, Russian olive and salt cedar both drive ecosystem change in their favor. They can disrupt the mycorrhizal community underground, which native plants rely on. They stabilize soils, which native plants in a riparian corridor generally don't like, as they evolved with a lot of high-level disturbance from flooding. So they like that disturbance, and these plants cut down on that. Also, cottonwoods, for example, can't germinate in stabilized soils under the shade of these trees. So they're both passengers and drivers of change. So very, very interesting and fascinating plants. I'm going to take a look here at the chat and see what I've missed that has come up. Do you have recommendations for osteoporosis? I'm hesitant to answer that question. I don't like giving medical advice in this kind of scenario. Herbalists want to ask a lot of questions in order to give a good suggestion. So unfortunately, I don't feel like this is a good venue for answering that, although there are good herbs to support that condition. So the answer is yes. Susan asks, the common olive tree, can you use the leaves? Oops, I'm sorry. And fruit as well. If we're talking about the Russian olive, you can use the leaves and fruit and bark. I don't know about other olive species. We have a New Mexico olive here, which I do not know it to have medicinal properties. So I think different species and genera of plants are going to have different medicinal qualities. So without knowing certainly what species you mean, and I don't know about regular olive trees, you know, that produce the fruit that we eat as olives. I don't know about medicinal properties on that one. So I don't know is my answer. And Benjamin asks, awesome. I was going to ask you about herbs for lowering blood pressure. So when you harvest the berries and or leaves and bark, how do you recommend preparing them for consumption? So in this case, I collect the bark, or I collect the leaves in the summertime, and then the the best time to harvest bark is the springtime, and the best time to harvest the berries is in the fall. So if you're a 3-season harvester, that would be ideal. I know we're all busy people, but that's when, you know, the springtime is when a lot of vitality is in the bark. The summertime is when there's a lot of vitality in the leaves. And then these fruits, as I said, are their most mature and best in the late summer, early fall. And then what I like to do is dry all of those things. And then I grind them up in a blender, and I prepare a tincture out of them. And I also like to make elixir out of them. An elixir is a combination of honey and alcohol and sometimes water, depending on how people make it. So that's how I like to do that. And then Jessica, let's see. Barbara asks, do you have recommendations? Oh, wait, I already asked that. Let's see here. And then Lauren says, how do you use Russian olive for pain relief? I would use it the way I just described, as a tincture or an elixir, as an internal remedy. Again, you could create topical preparations with this as well. You could take those plant parts, especially the leaves, and you could dry those and infuse those into oil and make a topical preparation out of oil. If you know how to make a salve, you could make a salve also and use that topically. When people have pain, I like to give them an internal and a topical remedy to go at it both ways to have the greatest efficacy. So that would be my recommendation on that. And I'm sorry about the question about osteoporosis. As I said, I don't, I would want to ask a lot more questions about a person's medical situation, but there are herbs that are calcium rich that can be used to support osteoporosis, but it's a larger question than that. I'm going to move along to our last plant because I want to make sure I can squeeze this in before 6 o'clock. So here is another really cool plant of our desert habitats. This is mesquite. And this is a plant, we have numerous species of it again, so I'm not giving a species specific name, but Prosopis is a plant that that's the genus name. This is a shrub or a smaller tree that grows in the more desert environments. You'll find this a lot in the southern half of New Mexico. It likes hot, dry conditions. This is a fascinating plant that has an interesting history with the landscape and with humans. It's theorized that this plant has ebbed and flowed in its population density and its range over thousands of years. If you can go back to the time of megafauna and large animals roaming the North American continent, it's theorized that this plant actually was much more widespread during that time because of the megafauna eating these nutritious bean pods and pooping out the seeds into a pile of fertilizer and helping to spread this plant through the landscape. And then as humans started spreading through the landscape in prehistoric times, its population decreased because in desert environments, there aren't very many plants or trees that could be gathered for firewood. So this was used as firewood. Also, these nutritious bean pods were probably the most, or one of the most important food sources for people living off the land. These bean pods contain a lot of nutrients and a lot of protein, and were very important in people's diets. And so the reproductive part of the plant was consumed by people. And then as cattle grazing became introduced and widespread on the landscape, the plant population again changed and started spreading and becoming more dense, because cattle eat grasses and other plants, nutritious plants in the landscape. They eat these pods and kind of do the same thing that the megafauna were doing and helping to spread this plant. And also, as we reduce grasses through cattle grazing, we also change the way fire interacts in the landscape, and that works in favor of woody shrubs. If we don't have fires quickly spreading, burning off grasses, and then that changes the way these plants interact with the landscape. So ebbing and flowing, along with landscape changes and changes by humans. And now, because of the legacy of cattle grazing, we do have mesquite more widespread on the landscape than it has been in the past. And for those of you who are wild food foragers or like working with wild foods, these bean pods are super nutritious. They are difficult to process at home without special machinery, but you can buy mesquite flour, which I highly recommend. It's delicious and nutritious. You can substitute about 20% of the flour from a recipe with mesquite. I don't like to go more than that because it has a really strong flavor. And if you use too much of it, it can make people's digestion upset, but it's nutritious and really flavorful. I like to make quiche crusts and cookies and muffins and pancakes and banana bread. We made a lot of banana bread during the last year. So I really love eating this. It's also a medicinal plant. It's very profoundly antimicrobial. The leaves, especially, for that purpose, but the pods and bark can also be used. And it's a broad spectrum antimicrobial used in wound care and infectious disease management. So this is a really valuable plant in the landscape. And here's another species, the honey mesquite. The one we just saw was the velvet mesquite. This is the honey mesquite, which is a little bit more shrub-like. And the velvet mesquite that we just looked at is a little bit more tree-like. But these are common plants in our landscape, which are very valuable plants for us ecologically and as people. So if you have questions, please put them in the chat. I'm happy to answer them in the last few minutes that we have here. Sarah asks, I've seen that plant just by the side of the road. Can I collect it? Does it matter if it's organic? So that's a great question. So when we're harvesting plants, there's a lot of things that we want to consider. One is, is this, a plant with a healthy population in my area? In the case of mesquite, yes. And then we also want to say, is the environment clean? Am I going to contaminate myself by harvesting here? I'll just tell very quickly a story about globe mallow. One of the students in my herbal studies program, and if you want to take classes with me, I teach classes on an ongoing basis on how to do medicine making and how to use herbal remedies. You can find that at albuquerqueherbalism.com. This student came in and was making a wash of globe mallow and treating her eczema with it. And she had been doing a great job and actually really improving her health. And then one day she came in and said, oh my God, I made a batch of it that just caused me to break out into a rash. And after talking with her about it, I realized she had gathered her last batch from a place where pesticide sprays had been used. And so she basically bathed herself in a pesticide spray wash. So I tell that story because it's really important to make sure that where you're harvesting is clean. I look, are there a lot of weeds growing around here? If the answer is yes, then I feel more confident. If the weeds look really beat down and battered or aren't there at all, then I'm more suspicious that people might be using herbicides or pesticides. So definitely keep that in mind. I usually tend to not want to harvest right along roadsides because of the car exhaust and the pollution that runs off of streets into the nearby soil. It's not the best environment. And this is a plant that you can easily find away from roadsides, especially if you're willing to drive a little bit farther south in New Mexico. Let's see what else came up here in the chat. Do you make mesquite flour yourself? I don't make it myself because you really need a hammer mill and I don't have one. So I buy mesquite flour and use that in my baking. I do most of my own wild food foraging and processing, but mesquite pods are pretty tough to grind up without a hammer mill. And I have on my blog at albuquerqueherbalism.com some recipes using mesquite and prickly pear. If you want to check that out, you can read that anytime at your leisure. And Susan asks, can you make the leaves and bark into a tincture to ingest? Yes, definitely. Dry those, chop them up, prune them up, and tincture those. And that would be a great antimicrobial. And Joe asks, what kind of local plant is good to treat itching? Well, it depends on why you're itching. So again, herbalists want to ask a lot of questions about why things are happening. But, you know, I could tell you lemon balm, or I'm sorry, bee balm, which is also, just to clarify the botanical name, it's called Monarda. That is, and here are my websites for people who are interested in following more of what I do. Monarda or bee balm is great for itching associated with like bee stings and ant bites and just kind of like minor rashes, allergic rashes, and things like that. But if the itching is caused by something else, like an autoimmune condition or something like that, then my answer would be different. Where could you buy mesquite flour? There are some sellers here in the Southwest. I would look for that in the Southwest. And to be honest, I cannot remember the company names that I have purchased from. If you want to email me that question, I could give you a better answer. I just can't recall the company names right off the top of my head. And you can contact me through any of these websites and I'll get the email if you have follow-up questions after this event. And then let's see here, trying to make sure I don't miss something. Judith asks, how does globe mallow relate to mallow? Very closely related. So that's Malva, not Malta. See, they just want to change our botanical names. So mallows in general share a lot those qualities that I described. So you could use marshmallow, you could use even, I know some herbalists have used hollyhock. There are other mallows in our environment, including the common mallow, which is Malva neglecta. That's a weed species in our area that you could use as well. So mallows have a lot of overlapping qualities and can be used interchangeably, at least the species that I know. So that's a good question. And then Christine asks, please repeat where you offer your classes. So I teach classes through Albuquerque Herbalism. So you can visit my website at albuquerqueherbalism.com. I have classes open for registration at all times. I teach a full semester program. Our next semester begins on August 24th. So you can sign up for that. We're hoping to do a combination of in-person and online for that semester. We do medicine making, we do body systems and herbal medicine discussions. We also do plant identification field trips. So it's a lot of fun. And I also am the director of the Yerba Mansa Project, which is, we gather the community together to do native medicinal plant restoration work in the Albuquerque Bosque. It's a lot of fun. We invite all community members of all ages are welcome and encouraged. So you can bring your kids, your grandma, and everybody. And we have a lot of fun at an intergenerational event working on loving and restoring our bosque. And we also do free educational programs and programs for school classrooms through the Yerba Mate Project. So those are places where you can find me, and we can do more things together in the future. About buying mesquite flour, Deborah, email me and I'll give you some suggestions. I just can't remember right now. And then the use of cottonwood, bark poultice for musculoskeletal pain, arthritis. Absolutely. I like to harvest the cottonwood buds as my favorite part, and we just passed the harvesting season for that. It's the very end of winter, but that is a great remedy for all of those ailments that you mentioned. It's a great anti-inflammatory and pain reliever. Yes. And Susan says, I've seen some bottles of herbs that state don't use for more than 2 weeks, golden seal in particular. Is there a limit to how much that can be taken consecutively? So that's a great question. And that really is going to depend on the herb. And a lot of commercially sold herbal products are going to have labels like that because they want to make sure people don't do stupid things and harm themselves. And everyone is different and has different sensitivities. And so it's a very big question to answer. And I can't just give a single answer. But some herbs are better for short-term use for acute situations only, because some, as one of the other attendees mentioned, Oregon grape bothers, I think she said, her kidneys. Some herbs can bother the liver over time because it's a lot of work for the liver to process. And some herbs interact with pharmaceuticals. So there are concerns, and that's a really big question to answer. And that's why I really encourage people to use herbs with knowledge. Just crowdsourcing your information and looking at a crappy website and taking herbs might not work out for a person. And that's why I recommend that people learn with a teacher, read my book. There are a lot of good ways to learn how to use herbs safely and effectively. And so golden seal is an herb, since you mentioned that, that people usually take for acute conditions for shorter periods of time. It's not an herb that I would recommend that people take as a tonic, meaning that they take over the long period of time. Some herbs are safe for that kind of use, and then others don't. And some herbs have many, many different kinds of actions in the body, and you may not want all of those actions occurring in your body. And so if you're using them for a short time, that's going to be fine. But then some of those actions over months or years might become a problem. So let's see, Susan asks, is there a company in Tucson that you can bring them pods? Yes. Tucson and Silver City both have community mesquite pod grinding events. Yes, thank you for bringing that up. That is a great resource. So thanks, Susan, for that. And then what kinds of herbs are calcium rich? Oats are calcium rich, and red clover blossoms are two common herbs that I would recommend for calcium. Also nettles. And so these are weedy kind of species that can be easily grown. And Willa asks, any thoughts on using antibiotic or antibacterial plants, and whether it should be considered that they could also kill good bacteria in the same way pharmaceutical antibiotics do? What a great question. I'm sorry if we're running over time to people who are managing this event at Santa Fe Library. If you need me to shut up.
No, it's all good. I'm so glad so many are engaged. Feel free to go on as long as you'd like.
Okay, great. All right, well then I'll keep answering the questions that come in. So Willa's question is fantastic. We've talked about the intelligence of herbs, and many herbs are selective. We know that herbs like garlic and roses have antimicrobial properties, but are also probiotic in the digestive system at the same time. So they can help grow the gut organisms that help us and can help impede the gut organisms that harm us. It's so cool. Whole plant medicines have balancing components and they have their full intelligence as medicines. And so they are different from medicines which are made from isolated chemicals and have those balancing components removed. So herbs in general are intuitive like that, and they are going to be specific against different specific microbes, and they can be antimicrobial in different ways. Their mechanisms can be very illuminating about how they might work or not work for your specific case. Some herbs are antimicrobial because they change your ecosystem of your body in such a way that it benefits beneficial organisms inside you and makes the ecosystem harder for harmful pathogens to grow in. This is why I teach the ecology of herbal medicine, because when we learn how herbs act in their natural environments, living their lives every day, we can see these things. We can see how herbs change their environments as plants. And that shows us how they're going to work inside our bodies also. It's fascinating. So Jessica has posted another question from Tara. Is there an herb that I can use for my skin for the itching caused by chlorine from the pool? Maybe oats. Soaking in a nice oat bath sounds really nice for that. And if you don't know how to make an oat bath, you're basically taking oats in a huge stock pot on your stove and cooking them on your stove and then straining out the solid parts. And then you have this milky liquid that you can soak in, and it's really, really soothing. One of the herb students in my program made an oat salve recently, which I've been using on one of my own little wounds, and it's been fantastic relief. So I really like oats for that purpose. Let's see. Oh, great suggestion on getting oat flour or mesquite flour in Santa Fe from Ecology Farm Stand. Bonus. Thank you for that. I'm going to try to remember that. Lehigh Shepherd asked, do you have OSHA? Do you use OSHA as an antibiotic? Yes. OSHA has been used really as a great medicine, particularly for the respiratory system, but it does have a lot of good antimicrobial uses, and so I would definitely recommend that. Let me see here. I think I lost where I was in the chat questions. OSHA is a really strong herb, and so I don't always recommend it right away. For some people, it can be a little overwhelming, and it's also a little bit drying. So it's important to be aware of that. If you have a dry condition, then it can make that condition more dry. But I do like OSHA. So yes. And where do you find Arnica growing wild in New Mexico? Arnica is a higher elevation plant, so you need to be in high elevation environments. So that's only going to be northern New Mexico at high elevation locations, in the Sangre de Cristos or something like that. I've actually harvested Arnica mostly up in Colorado. I find a lot more of it up there. So you have to be in Rocky Mountain kind of habitat for that. You are welcome, Susan. Thank you for coming. And let's see.
It looks like we have someone raising their hand, so I'm going to unmute them. And Chase, feel free to talk. Oh, we maybe lost them.
That's all right. People can contact me afterwards. Thank you everyone for coming, and thank you Jessica and Maria and Santa Fe Library for hosting me.
Thank you. This was an awesome program. I think a lot of people got a lot. I took a ton of notes. I'm so excited to learn more. Thank you so much, everyone. The book will be available at Santa Fe Library very soon. We're just processing that, and you can get copies of the book for purchase, many vendors online, as well as requested through your local bookstore. Everyone stay safe.
I will also just mention that Bookworks here in Albuquerque, which is my local bookstore, and they have an online shop. They have signed copies. If you want one, you can order it directly from Bookworks.
Awesome. I'm gonna do that. Yeah, check for our calendar for more upcoming events. Thank you so much for sharing all of this with us.
Thank you for having me. Good night, everyone.
Good night, everyone. Take care. Bye.